Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last presentation on day one of the International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference. My name is Rin Wolf Farmer. I'm your moderator for today's session. You can ask questions at any time during the presentation, but there will be dedicated time at the end for a live Q&A with our presenter today. To ask a question, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions anonymously if you desire. You can also upvote questions if you're interested in the same question that someone else asked. This helps us prioritize the most important questions to answer at the end. You can use the chat box for any non-questions, but try to keep distractions at a minimum in order to focus on the presentation. At the end of the session, I'll provide you with a 5-digit session code number. You'll need to write this code number down and enter it into the session code box at the top of the conference web app, which will direct you to complete the post-session evaluation. You have to complete the post-session evaluation to receive credit for either continuing education or to receive a general attendance certificate. We also understand that sessions at this conference may be triggering or re-traumatizing, and we want to ensure that you're taking care of yourself first and foremost. If you need to leave the session at any time, please do so. We are recording this session and you will be able to come back and watch it for 3 weeks following the ending of the conference. There are also safe people, volunteers who are available to talk to any of you during conference hours. You can find their contact information in the conference web app by clicking on the Spaces button in the purple bar and clicking on the Safe Space room. Finally, if you have any questions about the conference itself, you can email our conference organizer, Anna Schramm, at info@traffickingconference.com. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker to you. Anneke Lucas is an author, speaker, and advocate for sex trafficking victims and creator of the Unconditional Model. Her work is based on personal experience of a 35-year healing journey as a survivor of extreme abuse. Anneke's book, Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave, was published in 2022. At this time, I will begin our recorded presentation, and then at the end we'll come back and do a live Q&A with all of you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anneke Lucas, and I am going to be speaking about extreme abuse. So I just want to give you a trigger warning before I begin. And I'm going to speak specifically about power dynamics in healing from extreme abuse. And you can imagine that power and all the minute measurement of power in interpersonal dynamics becomes a thing when you've been abused in a big way as a child. So myself and other survivors of extreme abuse, and that includes mind control training and satanic ritual abuse as well. If we survive, then usually the healing process becomes extremely challenging as well. And so my personal experience was that I was born in Belgium in 1963, and at the age of 6, with the help of my mother, I was trafficked into a network of pedophiles that was the Belgian elite. And they were, like I called it, the club. They were basically gotten together and used children primarily for political blackmail, and also getting people into their secret clubs, and then using children to create material on them. And depending on who would go furthest and who, people would get triaged from the beginning once they started getting invited to those meetings. And I'm speaking about people who already had some standing or people who clearly wanted to climb in what they were doing in their field. So it was people from all fields, mostly business, politics, and then there were also aristocrats for whom this seemed to be more common, seemed to be more what they do, you know, what part of their culture, what they perhaps grew up with themselves and what they perpetuated. So in Belgium, the Minister of National Defense was running this network, certainly the blackmail operation of it. And the royals in Belgium were really the people who were truly in charge. And so it worked like a secret club that also included pedophilia. And it was definitely focused on elitism in that it was used for people to either climb, you know, the more brutal the people were that were coming in, the more they were rewarded externally and the more they were able to then do well in the world. At the time, I didn't know who anybody was. I didn't realize that the people that I came across had very visible positions on the world stage. But what I did know was the fear and the, you know, everything was about power. It was important for me as a child from the moment I was thrown in, and I really was kind of thrown in. I was groomed by a couple. The woman came to work as a cleaning lady at our house, and this couple then ended up taking me into the network at an event for the first time. And that was immediately a very extreme event. And as I said, my mother was also involved. She got involved a little bit later, but then basically took over from that couple and then drove me to events herself and then got paid. So, and you know, I have spoken extensively about my story and also about my mother. And if you are interested in finding out more and how this is even possible, do feel free to check out my work. And you have my website, annikelucas.com, and there you'll find just a whole lot of information, a whole lot of videos, a whole lot of articles. And I also have a blog post free for everyone, where you can really read and find out more. And I focus particularly on how psychologically it is possible for people to do these things. So, mm, so what I found was that people, and I was raped. There were women in this network as well, but I was raped primarily by men, and ultimately trained to be used exclusively for men. But what I noticed was that these men, when they were with me, so we're talking from 6 to 11, so that was the ages, we're talking very young. They somehow I got to see the child in them. And I had once seen it in a very powerful perpetrator that I know he was powerful because I had been given as a gift to him and he was visiting from abroad. And I know that the Belgians really wanted to do business with this person. So I I saw the child in him. I saw the scared little boy and I saw what was behind the horrible things he was doing and how he was really doing this to himself and how he was really afraid that he was this slow and he was ugly and he was stupid. And because I saw that fear, he noticed that I noticed, and he found it interesting that I was able to see it and somehow not make him, you know, I didn't make him feel bad about it. And then he then set out to train me for me specifically, and I was trained in mind control very specifically to find the weakness, which would be the vulnerability in powerful men, so that I could then access them more easily. And when we're talking accessing, mind control is all about the mind. Um, and in me accessing these men's mind and to manipulate them, to be able to use part of myself to, in the sex trafficking sense, use parts of myself that are completely with that man in that moment, flattering him as he needs in that particular space, and the wound, that is not of the of the little boy that hasn't healed, and then basically seeing it and then pretending to love that person in that space. And that is what sex slaves do, and that's what elite sex slaves do, is they basically become little mothers and or prostitutes, because as a prostitute, it's the same thing. And people go to find all sorts of things. They, you may think that you can cut off sexuality from anything else, but I see in that profession and in the people that, and in the Johns that pay for sex, only repetition wounds. It's very seldom you have someone who really has no other way to survive or to feed their own children. That does happen, but most of the time, these are survivors of childhood sexual abuse that are entering into an unconscious repetition. So coming into that repetition with the childhood sexual abuse and then taking aspects of the abuse, where perhaps the body was, got into the freeze state for survival. And from that freeze state, the parts that were formed there experienced pleasure, confused that kind of attention with love that's unavoidable. Now, when you're a child, you love anyway, you're loving. And when you get sexualized as a child, you do lose your innocence. But at the same time, what the abusers do is, because of their power, because of the age difference alone, the child, there is definitely fear of death, because this is a very huge infraction. And in that moment of fear of death, you are going to go into some kind of survival mechanism. That's where all abuse is power abuse, because that person, obviously, the power imbalance is clear. Um, and as a child, you end up, fear of death, you can suppress that very quickly, that fear of death, because your system and from the amygdala is just going to decide for you what it is that, how you're going to be responding. And of course, the largest, most 100%, almost 100% in cases in child sexual abuse, you will go into a freeze state. Your body will not be able to fight and kill the opponent. You will not be able to flee and outrun the perpetrator, but you will end up in a freeze state where your blood will be flowing more slowly. You will be filled with hormones that that not only reduce the pain but also make you high on pleasure. And that is, of course, what causes so much confusion in survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And that pleasure that is then felt is obviously completely impossible for a little child to think that they did not want this. And I think this is the essential confusion and perversion that happens with those children, that now love means to be sexual. And that is the real loss of innocence. And then in prostitution, or even in healing with methods such as Tantra, when there is a specific repetition as well, a sexual touch, you know, a lot of prostitutes will also say that they have the control. So that's to say they have the power. And that's very relative, of course, because it is indeed possible that you may have the power, you may not. You may have the power in that moment, but you may still be trafficked, or you, as in a healing, uh, quote, healing situation, not really healing situation, you will be able to make the choices, that supposedly feel right, but you're still in a situation where you're being touched intimately without there being the circumstances for true intimacy. So I just want to um, address that very briefly because I've been coming across a lot of people lately that are that this is very normalized now in certain places. And I'm from Belgium, and I noticed that, I've always practiced yoga, and it's very difficult to find a yoga place in Belgium that doesn't have a Tantra teacher connected to it. And again, all I see is a repetition of aspects of the abuse that felt pleasurable, and that is then used in a way that repetition is then the healing. So-called healing comes from the ability to then choose. But if it's within the same context of sexuality, that is not confined in an intimate relationship and a committed relationship, it is just a repetition of the abuse. It's sexuality that is supposedly divorced from real intimacy and love. So in childhood, these confusions happen. Yes, I very much, after the mind control, I definitely believed that I was the person that was having sex with these men rather than that I was being raped, for example. I never even heard the word rape when I was young. And I certainly always felt responsible. So from 6 to 9, I was being used any which way in the network. And again, we're talking about extreme abuse. So it was mostly sexual, but sometimes there was violence. And all of this was covered up with the help of my own mother and stepfather. Um, and sometimes that violence was extreme as well. And it wasn't as if I was supposed to survive really, but that accidentally, very accidentally, did happen. Now at age 9, so all these people there, what happened very often is that something that I was taught to do in the first years was I was supposed to, so we're talking 6 to 9, I was supposed to initiate the men, the new ones. So new men entering, these are men that have been heavily triaged to make sure that they are pedophiles, that they will not back off and engaging with a child, that if you get them drunk enough, they'll kind of do anything. These are the men that are entering into this club, and it is the ones that have the least connection with themselves and the least connection with any kind of like sort of inner sense of right and wrong, inner morality that is innate. It's not imposed from religion or anything. It is also very much an innate knowing that is always very subtle. So trauma and abuse can have the effect that you lose the sense of right and wrong. So what I found is that these men were coming to me shyly and acting like they were so shy and new at this. And so it was literally my task, and everything that I did was, of course, under threat of extreme violence, under threat of death. That was made clear right from the beginning. So my task for these men was to make them feel comfortable about what they were about to do. And we're talking, again, men that were supposedly new to this club, to this network, that were on their way up. And when they were considered ready, they were put with a very small child. And of course, this interaction was filmed or photographed so that then, of course, they would be in the pocket of the Minister of National Defense who was running the operation. And the power dynamics are very confusing there because obviously I am getting raped. And yet I am the person who's, the child. I'm making them feel okay. I'm telling them it's all right. I'm telling them not to worry. I'm showing them the ropes. Even though this certainly might sound confusing, it might be confusing. I wasn't too confused about the reality of these men are rapists and they should say, stop, I don't want to do this. This is a young child. I think the one common denominator of child rapists is that they do not see the innocence or the child, the young, what they do not know what it means to be a child. They do not see a child in a child. They do not understand innocence. And when they come in contact with it, pedophiles get drawn to it only in order to pervert it. And this is why it is always a repetition. I never saw, and I was raped by about 200 men in those years. I never saw a man that I didn't believe was himself raped as a child, had sexual abuse as a child, because I don't think without that, there would be no magnetic draw to children. I think even specifically would be initially at least drawn to a child of the age at which they were abused, because the child was in this place of extreme disempowerment, helplessness, powerlessness. In the moment, there's fear of death. Let's not forget it. And then afterwards, what happens? The fight, flight, freeze happens, then the freeze happens, and then in the freeze state, the fawning begins. Usually, for a little child with an adult perpetrator, fawning comes after the initial instinctual responses. So with the fawning is a way to try to get control over the situation and to try to get some kind of handle on this this fear that is just completely paralyzing, that if you were to allow yourself to feel everything in that moment, you would not be able to live. It is too overwhelming. It is too scary. And of course, all those feelings of terror and pain and some often betrayal, if it's someone you knew, all those feelings are suppressed, and those, in terms of parts, they become exiles. So when these men were doing that to me, they really, there is a reversal that happens in abuse. That is that in order to abuse, for these men, they needed to project. And so the projection, of course, is that I'm deserving what I'm getting. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. If you have no motivation, you couldn't bring yourself to do it. So if I deserve what is coming at me to me, then either you have to think that I'm just like an adult and I'm a prostitute and I like doing this. So you have to make yourself insane because there's a 6-year-old child there or a 7-year-old child. So, but that's what happens. You need a justification. And everybody there, and this is, in organized abuse, this is what is so sick, is that everybody there is encouraging that behavior and is repeating that, so that these justifications seem to get more traction. That the children are prostitutes, that the children, are there for that they're used to it, whatever else they said. But there is a reversal in that person, that in order to abuse, in order to perpetrate, you actually, what happens internally is you go back to the place of your own victimization in that moment. And it is not the parts that are exiled that come to the fore, but it is the parts that try to get control and that, are on the other side of that power, that powerlessness and that pain and that terror. Those are the parts that want and need to dominate. Once you are disempowered as a child, a child should never have to think about power. They should be able to be naturally narcissistic and feel like they are the center of the universe with their parents doting on them so that they never have to be reminded that they're actually extremely little physical beings that are extremely vulnerable and that this vulnerability could be exploited. Um, Ideally, a, a baby, a child, a toddler would never um, feel, would never be aware of any kind of power abuse, and they would never feel. That the frustration for a toddler would come from trying to walk, or not being able to express themselves as they understand things. The natural frustrations for babies and toddlers must be great enough that it's enough. There's no extra um, disempowerment needed. But of course, it happens very commonly. And that sense of, that the the problem of the moment of the abuse is that it is unbearable. There is always a transaction that happens. The abusers go in this place of the victim, but they then get into the revenge place. They go into the controller parts, I call them, the dominant parts. In IFS they're called manager parts. It's a manager part and a firefighter, or I call them controllers and escapees. So there's a controller that gets the dominant, that is dominant, and then there's an escapee that it has the release of the burden of shame that was once placed on their shoulders that they could never release unless they themselves either heal the hard way, or if they, the most raw way of releasing that burden temporarily is in a direct repetition on the other side of the power. So the abuser in that moment is getting the release that he or she as a victim never had, and is transferring that burden of shame onto the new victim. And in that process, the perpetrator needs to project onto the victim all the feelings that belong with their own perpetrators. And this is, of course, how abuse gets passed on. So I'm going to share some slides to illustrate a little bit of what I'm talking about. So here is the trauma that happens, and we have the instinctual responses to trauma: fight, flight, freeze. And from there, from that fight impulse that is suppressed, so let's say there's sexual trauma in a person, and then the fight instinct is suppressed, the flight instinct is suppressed as well, and the child goes into freeze mode. And at the same time, those feelings, those raw feelings connected to the abuse of pain and shame and grief and betrayal are also frozen and become disconnected from the parts that come to manage all the coping mechanisms that come to deal with that impossible burden that is now placed on that child. The burden of shame, it is really not possible to deal with shame, to feel shame that is imposed on you, because shame is a feeling that is there to help you um, adjust your behavior, so you can you can change your behavior, so you will not have to feel ashamed anymore, because feeling shame is so incredibly uncomfortable. So if you are raped, sexually abused, the burden of shame is unbearable because there is no way to correct it. And so as a child, the only thing you can do is to believe that it is innate, that you are bad, that because you have to deserve this, otherwise it could not happen. And so this shame belongs to you, which now means that you have lost your self-esteem, and that is really the process of losing your innocence, your innocence, which is, by the way, your power. So the coping mechanisms, the controllers, and the escapees are really there to take back the power. So the power that is now lost and is put away, those feelings are, also suppressed and dissociated, then the the controllers that come out of the fight response, out of the suppressed fight response, and the escapees that come out of the suppressed flight response are going to be trying to gain control. So when we look at the world, I'll just stop the share for a second. When we look at the world, we see that the power structure in the world is actually based on unresolved trauma, in that the perpetrator class is the elite class. And the people that abused me in this network were actually globally extremely powerful, that I found out later. I, I just knew that what was happening was extremely intense, and that I had to measure someone's power in order to survive. So I needed to measure someone's power, and the most powerful ones, the scariest person, I needed to please, because otherwise my life was more in danger, and they were the ones with the most say. So really what I had to measure was the degree of power, and the degree of power really comes is synonymous with the degree of danger from that person. What is that person capable of? So as I said, it's the most brutal people that made their way up in this network more easily. So I miraculously survived. And then when I was healing, I was in my 20s, I was already getting flashbacks. I'm now 62, and I was hit with flashbacks from basically my mid-20s. And I couldn't place them, and I started therapy soon after, but not for the flashbacks necessarily. I just wanted to check it out. I didn't want to believe that these flashbacks were real. But basically, the problem I usually had is it was very difficult to find a therapist who was open to, even considering that these flashbacks could be something to talk about. So I couldn't bring what I was dealing with to anyone for 10 years. But the additional problem that I had is that because I'm so sensitive to power abuse and power dynamics, I felt that most of the time therapists wanted to were relying on their position or their expertise, and or perhaps just the fact that they need their clients to need them. And this triggered me. And so I had a really hard time I needed to find someone who was humble enough and open. And I did find that person after 10 years and worked with her for 8 years. And then she had to retire. And then I was back in the same situation, finding people that would be that were not attached to their own status, which again, that's the power. And when someone needs power, it actually relates to their own unresolved trauma. That's where the power imbalance comes from. So I'm gonna just share another slide with you. Um, so this slide is, we were dealing with extreme power abuse, but we can see, and I told you that these abusers were basically finding dominance of their own powerlessness that was, started by the abuse that they must have suffered when they were a child, and they were giving themselves the power in that moment. But what is happening in the world is that this is happening everywhere all the time. And it is also something that we're not at all invited to observe. But there are projections happening all the time, positive projection and negative projection. So in the world, in the society that we live in, we have people who are absolute maniacs who are at the top of that society, who are even secretly, I mean, from what I learned from childhood, from the politicians that were my abusers, they had people that were managing them. They were pedophiles, and so they were controlled. And at the very top were people sometimes who were not pedophiles, but who controlled the pedophiles, because obviously they're more easy to control. And we're talking global levels. We're talking, heads of state of a lot, many Western nations that I came across at the time, as well as celebrities at the time, as well as business people, as well as, bankers. So we're talking about basically the top of the top tier of society that is that has in common that they look down on the rest of us all the time. So there is a constant negative projection on all of us all the time, which I think it's pretty clear that if our politicians were sincere, that things would not look the way they do today, and they would have improved over the last 50 years. There's no reason why things have to keep getting worse. That is only because of the insane greed of those people. So when we're looking at small time projections, there can be a therapist that needs their clients to need them. There's a negative projection there. They see that client or that patient as a little bit lower than them, and that creates a power imbalance where it is not completely pure. It's not unconditional. The presence of that therapist is not unconditional. They're there for their own reasons, and that creates that negative projection. Negative projection is anything, any kind of judgment, any kind of exploitation, anything placing someone lower than yourself, and you give yourself more value in that way, and it indicates directly that you are coming from a place of unresolved trauma, and that there is a part in you that needs to be seen, that needs to be understood, that needs to be recognized. You are projecting negatively, seeing a reflection of yourself in someone else that you have not accepted in yourself. Whereas the positive projection, when you put someone up, and when you admire someone, and it's not just, okay, you can admire, I mean, I like people who are physically very fit, for example, but it is when you think they're a better person than you, and somehow you become like a child in their presence, or you start laughing and giggling or something, when you're with. So you're actually, there's someone you project positively onto, and you enter into the role of a child, and you put them in the role of the adult. And on the negative end, you put yourself in the control position, and you project negatively. You put yourself in the role of the old school adult, and you look down on the person below you. And so we're invited to be looking up to certain people and look down on other people. In our society, we're actually invited to look up to people who are extremely wealthy and that are getting a lot of, and that are using their wealth and resources to create an image for us and make us believe that they really are what they pretend they are, which they're not at all. I mean, we don't know these people is the bottom line. And we're also invited to project down on people that are actually, well, a lot of people we're being asked to project down on a lot of people, but also societally, people that are lower class, we are subtly now being invited to project down. And then, the division works like that, is you're invited to project down on another group. And then they're invited to project down on you. So that creates the division. It's just 2 times negative projection. That means you have controller parts dealing with controller parts, or you're not dealing with whole people in that. And then another way is that usually when you're with one person, you start with a positive projection. Sometimes it can happen in a romantic relationship, but also with, a therapist, it can be that. And then after some while, if that person, you start to feel safe with that person, then the negative projection starts. And that's usually when people say, well, I don't recognize the person that I met. Um, so I wanted to share that with you. Just want to look at the time. Yeah, so what is it that each one of us can do to even out power imbalances in ourselves? Because really, just think, if all of us are empowered and we don't have power imbalances, there is no need for an externalized toxic power structure. So the healing of trauma really is the most revolutionary thing you can do, because the healing of trauma, looking at those vulnerabilities and going in and discovering, going in to heal the dissociation, going in and discovering whatever it is, it's small t, big T trauma, that creates greater consciousness, that increases our awareness of ourselves. And every time a part is integrated, that integration means that you are now more inside yourself, and you are less, you are more empowered. And the more empowered we are, the less we need to fit into the external power structure. There's lots of invitations from the external power structures, and there's a lot of mass mind control as well to get everyone, to get everybody going along with agendas that were talked about when I was trained for mind control. And these agendas are nefarious, and most of us unconsciously take part in it because the brainwashing is just simply everywhere, because it started with radio and then television and now our screens. I mean, it is so difficult not to be brainwashed. um it's, that's on purpose. A lot of it is on purpose. And the only way that these messages can enter and can take hold in us is if we have a blind spot. And that blind spot, of course, leads us directly to our own vulnerabilities and our own unresolved trauma. It's unresolved trauma and the dissociation stemming from that unresolved trauma that creates blind spots in the first place. And of course, we're talking about very subtle power dynamics. But when you start projecting negatively, when you judge someone, and I mean value judgment, I don't mean judging, just seeing what there is. But when we do that, we are participating in the same kind of projection that ultimately is used to kill someone. Once we project negatively onto someone, if we don't pull back and say, wow, this is me, this is actually a part of me that I'm looking at and I can't accept yet, let me focus on myself rather than engage. If or whatever it is, there's things coming, being thrown at us night and day for us to be form opinions on and to participate in, and it's a lot of it is invitations to project down on other groups. And if we do that, once we do that, we're lost in projection land. There is no coming back. You really need to bring everything back to yourself at the end of the day. That's all we've got. The truth comes from within, and empowerment really comes through healing. So I'll just want to check to see if I've covered what I was going to talk about. Yeah, so the personal healing for each one of us, these power dynamics and awareness of power dynamics are actually potentially can be used as a lens into our own unresolved trauma. So when we look up to someone, when we give our power away and we put ourselves in the position of the child, then the question is, well, there's a lot we can do, but the first thing to recognize is when I give my power away to someone, to recognize that I'm putting myself in the position of a child and that this person is a representative of an adult. And usually it is the hypocritical face of an adult of our childhood. And the big question is, first, who does this person remind me of my childhood? And the second big question is, what, like if we go to childhood or maybe in the present tense, what would happen if I didn't placate this person, if I didn't look up to that person, if I didn't make them good? What would happen? And that what if is a really important question, because that will get you to the potential truth that's hiding underneath that projection. And when you're projecting down on someone and you're basically looking at someone, if you can accept the assumption that you are actually, when you look down, there's so much invitation now to look down on other groups. So sometimes you just have to sort of sort through, like, what is it about this group or this person or this organization that I dislike so much or that I hate, or so you sometimes you have to sort of sift through it a little bit to see what it is that is ultimately about you, the thing that you cannot accept within yourself. What is it? And then, of course, once you see that, once you can recognize it, again, there's a list of questions to ask. Where do we know that feeling from? Where do you feel it in the body? And where do you know that feeling from? And have you felt it, when you were young? And then you can move towards healing. And of course, this is partially my unconditional model that I teach. I teach it online and I teach it in person. And I have created ebooks, 30-page each, with these questions, with the starting point being the projection up or projection down. So projection and power projection is extremely powerful, and it is usually these subtle power differences are, we're not encouraged to talk about it at all. Like when anybody that what is what is the power dynamic between you? Are you really equals? And this includes in situations where there's a hierarchy. When there's a boss, for example, it's one thing to be a boss, it's another thing to be attached to the position of boss. And that changes everything, because the person who's attached to their position of boss is going to be really a less effective and less kind boss than um, than somebody who's not. And usually they can be even very, very nice, but there's always that what if. What if I challenge that one thing that they don't like? Then what happens? Um, so it is present just everywhere, everywhere. There's a lot of people, you know, because there is so much trauma in the world, and it really is that the trauma robs us of our self-esteem. So how do we replace it? And the fake substitutes for trauma, the best one is power. For self-esteem, the best substitute, pretend substitute for self-esteem is power. So when we look at the world, how many people are attached to their position and their status, and are somewhere in a hierarchy because they need to be there? And when we're looking at the people that are on the top of the hierarchy of our societal structure, you bet you that these people come from extreme trauma, and their reaction to their trauma has made them psychopaths. And they have nothing left. They are constantly in controller parts, trying to control everybody else in the world, and escapee parts, addictive parts, just finding release. And everything they do, there is no access to their exiles, and there's no access to any spirituality and greater consciousness, which is the true self and linked very tightly to innocence itself. Without innocence, if you've lost the belief, I mean, usually that happens at an extremely young age, that you are innocent, then you basically are thrown out of yourself, and you have no self-esteem. You have no connection to who you truly are beyond the body. And then life gets very, what are you then going to do to give yourself a semblance of self-esteem? And that is what power does. And when we look at the world, it's mostly built that way still, but we are moving away from it. So this is a great time to just take awareness, I think, of power dynamics and all the forms of power abuse and all the ways in which we unconsciously participate. Because the moment we project down on a group or on somebody, we are actually participating in this unhealthy power dynamic that is based on power abuse. And the moment we give power to someone without knowing that person, and we just think the world of them, and maybe they're just somebody from the news or something, or from a celebrity or whatever, or they're a speaker, or whoever, or a great teacher. When we give ourselves up like that, when we become the child in that relationship, it's the first question you should always ask yourself is that, how would that person do if they didn't have the power? Because most people that need the power, they're going to take your upward projection and use it to feed themselves. That's really what happens. It's an energy theft where they are really the parasites, and they need you to love them. That's the upward projection. It creates this fear-based love. And when you give your love like that, or your energy like that, you do bleed from energy. You give them something that's not theirs to take. And that's where these relationships, that kind of energetic exchange remains like that for people who do need the power. They just take it. They never give you anything back. Or whatever they give back, there's always the what if. Just think about that. Like a lot of great teachers, they have a lot to offer. But if there's this what if they need to be in that position, there's an issue. And it's really good to get underneath that and to tickle that, and to see what they're really about. And for you, especially for you yourself, to get out of that and to empower yourself and to not need any external validation anymore, because you're healed. So I'm going to end here. I hope this was clarifying, and I'll be here for your questions if you have any. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anneke. If you want to come back on screen, we can start our Q&A session. We only have about 3 to 4 minutes to answer questions live here.
Um, okay, I can't start the video apparently
Okay,
from
one moment.
yes,
Let me see if I can ask you to start it.
here. There.
There you go. Wonderful. We do have several questions. So I can start with the first one from George. Would you please show your website address? Do you have a website?
Yes, of course. It's my name, AnnikeLucas.com. So it's just very simple, ANNEKELUCAS and .com. And I want to say I had my settings wrong. So I was reading the messages and I was responding, but you couldn't see my answer. So I just want to say hi, Rivers, and hi, person from Dublin. And I'm reading the messages. So thank you very much. Yeah. And okay.
So the next question is from Mike. Does this also correlate to the lack of power in trafficking, leading to distrust of authority figures, especially those that are the same gender as the abuser or buyer? This is what I experienced being trafficked as a young boy, ages 5 to 8, to men.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yes. Yeah, so obviously that's the starting point. A lot of troubles with authorities, a lot of troubles with men. I for a long time harbored hatred of men and fear of men, and then the fear especially put me in those placating roles where I just hated myself for placating, and then I wanted, and then there were, then I parts wanted revenge, but that's where all this comes out of. The whole unconditional model and looking at power dynamics really comes out of that because it was so difficult once I was an adult and looking for help to find somebody that I could really respect I needed somebody to help me, but I often, and I think a lot of us do, because we're so used to being at the, attuned. We're so used to attuning ourselves with people. A lot of providers actually started telling me their stories. A lot of providers turned the roles around on me. And I think that a lot of us experienced that. So it was just really hard to find somebody that was really being able to be fully present, not afraid of what I was bringing, but also not needing me or not having some other agenda that really wasn't about me. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. Came out of that for sure.
Thank you so much. We probably only have time for one more question. So Shelley asks, how much is the perp being held accountable or exposed to complete healing? If I might ask, were any of your perps held accountable, meaning by authorities?
Yeah, I saw that question. So it's kind of a complicated question because held accountable, like I've been naming people a little bit, it's not the purpose of why I speak out. I went to the police in the 1990s, so it was 20 years after the fact. I didn't get very far because I was mocked tremendously. I was laughed at. I was treated really rather brutally. And so I only got to the first pimp, naming him, and the way that that was handled. I just knew that if I was going to say the name of somebody famous in Belgium, forget it. That was just, there was no way. But also, there's tremendous um, threats, because the people that were abusing me were powerful and visible. So there's a lot of threats, and these threats are not idle threats, which are made clear right from the start to make sure that you never speak out. And I was told many, many times, you go to anybody, you'll get punished, they'll get killed, and anything always comes back to us. And there was a case in Belgium, the Dutroux case, Dutroux. So this was sort of the Belgian Epstein case. It was a long time ago in 1996. And that case was supposed to sort of take apart this network, which never happened. So you could see the beginning, everybody talked about the network. International press talked about the Belgian network, where in which I was abused also. And then 8 years later, one guy, basically one person, went to prison, and everything relating to the network was completely cut from the case. So there's so much. There were people from the justice system that were in this network as well. And I want to just clarify, it obviously isn't everybody, but it's always seems to be enough people to make sure that nothing truly can happen on that level. So,
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us today. We are unfortunately out of time, but because they record this, they record all of the questions that all of you had, and they will send those to Annika. So you can reply to those directly. You'll get their emails and their questions so that you can reply to them directly. The session code today is 06636. Again, 06636. That is the session code, so you can enter that into the conference web app to get your certificate of attendance or get your CEU credits. I hope that you will join us for our closing session today. Celia Williamson will be there this afternoon. She wasn't able to make it this morning. And then hopefully you can join us again tomorrow and Friday for more wonderful presentations. Again, Anneke, thank you for sharing your story. We really appreciate you being here today.
thank you, everyone. Bye bye. Thank you. Bye.